Robert, can you tell me a little bit about who you are and the organization that you work for?
Well, my name is Robert Ridge, and I'm the Executive Director of Distress Centres of Greater Toronto. Distress Centres of Greater Toronto is a crisis support organization that provides emotional and mental health support to people in both Toronto and the region of Peel.
Amazing. So what specific services does Toronto Distress Centre offer?
Well, we have both inbound and outbound programs. So we have a couple of main crisis lines where people can call if they're feeling lonely or isolated or need any kind of mental health support. We also have a number of priority lines. For instance, we operate the Crisis Link service for the TTC, which provides a link for people on a subway platform if they're experiencing suicidal ideation. We also run a number of outbound programs, and the outbound programs are primarily aimed at seniors who need some emotional support or other forms of support. And then we have a program called our Survivor Support Program, which is intended for people who have experienced loss through suicide or homicide.
Amazing. So a lot of great services offered for people in need. Have you seen a dramatic impact on the mental health of people who you may service due to COVID-19?
So we've certainly seen an impact over the last 6 to 8 months. I'm not sure I would call it a dramatic impact yet, but it certainly may go there. We've noticed an increase in the number of inbound calls to our service, probably by about 10%. But probably more troubling is the increased severity of those calls. Almost everyone who calls mentions COVID as an issue. So for people who have had existing mental health conditions or have been isolated or felt lonely, COVID is only making their situation worse.
Right. That makes sense. So how has COVID-19 affected your processes at Toronto Distress Centre?
Well, I like a lot of organizations, it's affected them pretty dramatically.
Right.
So we have four facilities where volunteer responders would come to take calls. And prior to COVID, about 90% of our calls were taken at one of those 4 locations. The other 10% were taken remotely. COVID has completely flipped that. So as of today, 100% of our calls are being taken by volunteers working remotely. And all of our support to our Survivor Support Program is being facilitated remotely as well. So all of our 4 locations are closed now, but we're still providing all of the same services that we did when those 4 locations were open. We made a shift to remote responding within a period of about 6 weeks. We moved all of our responders to basically work out of their homes. Up until a couple of weeks ago, before both Peel and Toronto were locked down, we did have a few volunteers who preferred to come into the facility to take calls, but since the lockdowns, we've had to change that.
Should I assume that was a lengthy and rigorous process, switching to working from home?
We had some experience in having staff working from home, and I think that really helped. We had the infrastructure in place. We had a great technology provider who provided support throughout the process. It was difficult, though. It was more difficult on staff and volunteers who had to very, very quickly find a way to make it work remotely when most of our experience had been in taking calls in a more controlled facility environment.
Understood. Yeah. So can you tell me a little bit about your volunteers? Who are they? Where do they come from? What is their level of experience? And counselors as well, actually.
So our volunteers and counselors, so I'll start with our volunteers. Our volunteers, anyone can be a crisis line volunteer. So if you're interested in becoming a crisis line volunteer, you're first screened. And you go through a vulnerable sector screening, a number of other screens to ensure that you have the foundation for the role. Then you go through a training regimen that includes about 40 hours of training. Previous to COVID, this was in-class training. Now we're offering it virtually. And then you typically work with a mentor for a number of calls before you feel comfortable enough to take calls on your own. We have volunteers who come from every walk of life. It could be, we have many students who are interested in entering, becoming a police officer, a firefighter, a paramedic, perhaps entering the mental health field. We have people who have retired and are interested in giving back, and everything in between. We really have a wide range of people who are volunteering for the organization. And we have well over 500 active volunteers at the current time. With respect to the counselors and our survivor support program, the counselors typically have lived experience. They typically have had experience with loss through suicide or homicide. They too go through an extensive training program, an extensive program where they're working with a mentor to prepare them for that role. But again, they range from people who are students all the way up to seniors and everything in between. It's quite a mix.
Sounds very in-depth. Can you give me a sense of what sort of costs are associated with running a program like this?
Well, the primary costs in running distress centers relate to people. So we have a relatively small staff given the amount of work that we do. We have about 20 full-time staff. Most of those staff work directly in coordinating, supporting, training volunteers to work on the lines. And in addition to staff, we have our 4 facilities. And then we have all of the telecommunications infrastructure that you can imagine is associated with handling inbound and outbound calls.
Yeah, I can see how that could be very large and take a lot of man hours.
Yes.
Can you give me some examples of the kinds of calls that you may receive?
So, we receive calls that range from people who are feeling lonely and isolated, all the way up to people who are experiencing suicidal ideation. So many calls are from people who have very few other people, if anyone, in their life, and they're just looking for some emotional support to make it through the day or make it through the week. We have calls from people who want to discuss relationship issues. They might have gone through a relationship change in the last little while. And they want to talk about that. We have people who feel anxious or depressed. They want to talk about that. It really runs the gamut. And we have people who would call in just to talk about COVID. On their mind, it's making them anxious. They want to talk about it. So really, people can call us and talk about anything that's on their mind, and hopefully by the end of the call, we've been able to make a difference in their life and help them feel better.
Absolutely, it's great to know that a service like this exists. So, what does your follow-up process look like after you've already spoken to one of these individuals?
So typically, what that would look like is, in most cases, we would just encourage people who are calling to call back if they want to talk further about their situation. In some cases, we would make referrals to other programs that might be well suited for that individual based on their situation, and then that would be the primary reasons that we would follow up with an individual. In some cases, if someone has a persistent issue that requires ongoing support, they would enter one of our programs where we would make more predictable contact with them over a period of time.
Sounds great. So what percentage of your funding at Toronto Distress Center comes from charitable donation? And where does the rest of the funding come from?
So our funding, it's fairly diversified. It looks something like this, that we have about 30% of our funding coming from fundraising, about 30% coming from government grants. We have about 30% coming from the United Way. And then the remaining 10% comes what we call from earned revenue sources, so contracts to provide services. So a fairly diversified portfolio of revenue.
Absolutely. So a charitable donation from an organization like CarHub Automotive Group, how would those funds be allotted?
So what we'll probably do with those funds is to use them to help support our remote responders. We've incurred quite significant costs this year, and we expect all through next year to equip our remote responders to take calls. Putting all the infrastructure in place for them to have connections at home, to provide the headsets, in some cases provide the technology itself. Those costs have been really significant this year, and that's likely how we'll use those funds to support the ongoing ability of us to deliver services remotely. Because I think, when you think about it, COVID's not going to just end. There's going to be a long tail with respect to, things getting back to normal. I don't anticipate that staff or volunteers are going to all of a sudden one day feel comfortable coming back into our facilities. Some will, but I think the vast majority, it's going to take some time before we're able to kind of reestablish that sense of normalcy with people.
Absolutely. And it's really great to know that the CarHub donation will be going to something that is so helpful to an organization like Toronto Distress Center. So that's an excellent response. Thank you. Do you have any suggestions of positive or healthy activities that could help ease mental health strain on individuals who may be struggling?
I don't think I would have suggestions that would vary dramatically from what you've likely heard. But I'll share a few. I mean, I think the first would be that for someone who's anxious about COVID, don't spend a lot of time watching the TV or going online and watching news online, because the news is just so persistently negative.
Right. Yes.
That can really have an impact on your mental health. So limit your exposure to those types of messages, I think, would be my number one piece of advice. And then the other advice would be, is exercise. Be careful about your diet. Make sure you're getting enough sleep. Just all the basics. I think those, having some foundational elements in place with respect to your health can really make a big difference during a more stressful time like COVID. And COVID's not going away anytime soon. So, I think to the extent that you can, think about and work on your own habits, perhaps consider, what your own personal habits are for calming your mind. It might be, it might be meditation or yoga or similar practices that you might want to consider, checking out and seeing if they help you.
Absolutely. So back to Toronto Distress Center and your processes. Which areas of your organization currently require the most support and awareness?
I would say that we probably could use even more exposure with respect to the existence of our crisis lines and helping people understand that they're free, they're available 24/7, they're anonymous, they're safe to call. These are, at the other end of the line are people like you and me who just have an interest in helping other people. So that would be my number one, call for greater awareness. It's just letting people know that we're here and we're here to help.
Fantastic. What does Toronto Distress Center do to raise this awareness? How do you get the word out there that basically that you exist and that people can call and find some help if they need it?
You know, we have a number of organizations that are aware of us. So we're pretty plugged into the mental health infrastructure of Toronto and Peel region. We've been around since 1967, so we're well known. We of course use social media to draw attention to ourselves. Those would be the main avenues. We don't have any kind of budget to advertise or promote our services, but we do rely on social media and our reputation from our partners that we work with every day.
Fantastic. So social media is such a powerful tool for spreading that awareness. So hopefully we can help with our CarHub social media channels as well.
That would be amazing.
So what's next for Toronto Distress Center in 2021 in terms of plans and programs for coming into the new year?
Well, you know, on a positive note, we've learned so much from COVID, as I suspect other organizations have as well, and it will permanently change the way that we run our operation. We know now that people can work effectively remotely. They can respond to calls effectively remotely. And by allowing more remote responders, we effectively increase our volunteer pool. And by doing training virtually, we can train a person who from anywhere. You know, they don't have to be local to Peel or Toronto. They can be anywhere. So that opens up tremendous new doors for us in terms of our volunteer pool. And we're a volunteer-driven organization. So, you know, that's the exciting part. If you can say there is one about COVID, is it really required us to have a good hard look at our processes and to make decisions about how to change them very quickly. And that's given us the confidence to go into 2021 with new ways of working that I think are going to be more effective in the long run. We're really excited about that.
Great. So Robert, is there anything else that you'd like to add? Any final thoughts about this donation, about 2021, about COVID-19, about Toronto Distress Center's impact in general, or just anything from the heart that you'd like to say?
You know, I would just say that we're really so appreciative of the CarHub donation. That kind of support means so much to us, and it goes a long way. You know, we're a very, very lean and effective organization. I think we punch way above our weight in terms of, you know, the work that we do, and that support was unexpected and very, very much appreciated. So thank you.